brand new from Panasonic, the Lumix S5. Now, there's a lot of things that are great about this camera and also a few things that could use some improvement. Let's start with this, a full frame 24.2 megapixel sensor that records 4K at 10-bit 422. We're getting over 14 stops of dynamic range. We have dual card slots, a nice flip screen, dual native ISO, so we should get some pretty good low light performance, and Panasonic has always had great IBIS colors. What? I would say the biggest catch has probably got to be that the autofocus on here isn't the best. Now, it's still usable in some cases, but if you need perfect autofocus, I would probably look elsewhere. Now, one way to look at it is that it's kind of the smaller budget S1H. Carries over a lot of what its bigger brothers have to offer, but it's also more compact than the GH5. So let's go ahead, take this out for a little spin, and we'll come back and look at the footage. Here we go.
Mr. Nagata, I don't think this is a good idea.
I think it'll be okay.
Business casual Mondays, am I right?
What do you think, Sam? You think we got some good shots?
Mr. Nagata, I think we got some amazing shots.
Something's different about you. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I don't know, you just seem different today. So overall, I would say the image quality coming out of this camera, it's pretty solid. It's nice and sharp, there's good dynamic range, it's flexible, the camera itself is powerful, no reliability issues. Now, me being a first-time Panasonic shooter, I was definitely impressed with the IBIS. If you compare it to no image stabilization, you can see that it helps reduce a lot of that jittery movement. And on top of that, we can go ahead and add in some digital stabilization, which helps, and that digital stabilization is done with information from a gyro. They all work together from your lens to your IBIS to the digital to kind of combine all that data and try to give you the smoothest image. And whatever they do, it works pretty dang good. And then there's Boost IS, which isn't really designed for too much movement. So you can kind of see that at points it's smooth, but then there's like a jerk and then it smooths out again and then it jerks again. But if you're just standing stationary and trying to get a nice tripod looking shot, you can. My hands aren't that stable, but I was able to give it that floaty feel, almost like it's on a gimbal or something right there. And I am loving the sharpness of the image. I mean, even if you're not looking at it in 4K, you can tell that it's really nice and crisp. Now, while I was shooting some of this low light footage, one of the things that really spooked me was that in the shadows there, it looked like there was so much grain on the LCD. But luckily, as soon as you hit record, all that noise just disappeared. So your end result is gonna be nice and crisp. I mean, look at some of these shots, how much detail there is in the ocean. It's super sharp. It's definitely a quality video camera. Now in Vlog, the dual native ISO is at 640 and 4000. So when I go up on ISO, it automatically switches over to the better low light circuit. And check this out, it's looking pretty clean right here at 4000 ISO. We'll keep pushing it, we'll go up to 8000, still looks nice and sharp, plenty of detail in there still. Now we're at 12,800, typically the highest I'll ever go. Definitely seeing some noise, but it's not bad. So if you're in the middle of nowhere with no lighting, you can still get that shot. And even though there is grain in the shot, it's not terrible. I'm definitely not hating the way the grain looks on this camera. And to really push it, 25,600 ISO. You rarely have to actually get it all the way up to that level. So you can definitely use this camera to get amazing images even in low light, but I wouldn't personally use it for vlogging because the autofocus just isn't 100% there. Autofocus, come on, buddy. You can do this. I believe in you. Oh, that focus. Come back, focus. Oh, son of a bitch. I would say depending on your lighting and lens, there are times where it is decent. I did shoot a few vlogs on my second channel with this camera, and immediately people were like, what's wrong with the autofocus? Now keep in mind that this is still a prototype unit and there's probably more firmwares to come which may improve that, but I still don't see it being as good as a Canon or Sony. So for vlogs, I feel like autofocus is one of the most important priorities. So because of that, I wouldn't vlog on this, but I don't really think of this as a vlog camera. I think of this as a really powerful camera. Again, the autofocus, it's usable in some cases. So here's a few shots that I use this camera for on the vlog. And I did really treat this camera like a point and shoot. I had it on shutter priority, so I locked in the shutter speed. I rely completely on the auto exposure, the auto focus, and there's definitely a few shots where the focus was missed, but you know, in general, they did come out looking fairly sharp. It just isn't super consistent. But when the focus does hit, the image quality outstanding, even in unideal lighting because of that dynamic range. So right now they're standing in the shadow on a bright sunny day, and I was still able to easily bring up those shadows so there's still enough detail in their faces and parts of the motorcycle. Another downside is that you're not gonna get a ton of high frame rate options out of this camera. Here are some shots in 60p, and there is a pretty significant crop in just to go past 30. So again, 24 and 30 frames per second in 10-bit 4K is its sweet spot, but if you go to 60, then you face a crop.
Excuse me, Mr. Nagata, can you keep this whole ruckus down? I'm trying to edit in the other room and it's kind of distracting.
Nice tie.
If you drop into 1080p, you can still get, you know, 120, 150, 180, but you do start to lose quite a few things. For example, you can't shoot 10-bit anymore. You lose autofocus at 120p and you get a slight crop in 180p. And again, these are all HD modes. Now, I did do a few rolling shutter tests and it's really not bad. If you really whip it around, you could definitely see a little bit in there. I think in most cases, you're not gonna have any problems there. Now, on this shot, I was actually pretty impressed with how stable the image actually came out. I had it on boost image stabilization and I was just walking parallel with them, and it really came out looking smooth considering that I was walking and just holding it like this. I wouldn't say gimbal like stability, but definitely some of the smoothest shots I've ever gotten out of a small camera, just hand holding it like that. So definitely props to Panasonic for their IBIS. Now, like I said, this is my first time shooting on a Panasonic camera, but let's go meet up with my buddy who shoots on Panasonic all the time. You are a Panasonic guy.
I have been, yeah. This is the GH4. A few years ago, I made the decision to get rid of the filter that goes in front of the sensor that normally blocks ultraviolet light and infrared light, and just have a clear piece of glass put in front there. And so this camera is now sensitive to infrared light or to ultraviolet light. So you can put on a lens, and as long as it passes that kind of light through to the sensor, you can essentially see in the dark with like infrared mode, and you can see ultraviolet.
So anyone with a GH4, all you have to do is take a knife, throw it in there, just, and then
it doesn't have to be a GH4, you can do it with basically any camera. Because these sensors, right, these are solid state sensors, silicon chips essentially, and they are sensitive to all sorts of wavelengths.
Click right there if you want to see
the world in the UV.
Yes. So then you went to the GH5.
GH5, and I feel like the GH5 is a big step up. Great image quality, I think, great colors, love vlog. And I was amazed at what you're able to do shooting with windows behind you, and normally things would be totally blown out, but with these cameras, you can just get way more dynamic range than I think you would expect out of a little camera like that.
The GH5 seemed like it was ahead of the time, right? Because it was one of the first ones to get to 4K 10-bit.
It's amazing. So when the S1H came out, there were some features that I really jumped at. I think it is a low light beast with dual native ISO. I mean, being full frame, it's fantastic. Two big problems with the S1H. Super heavy, very difficult to vlog with. And the other problem is autofocus. They just haven't improved the autofocus in my mind. To a level where it's 100% reliable.
Right, so you've been doing this, huh? You leave this on the tripod and you kind of...
I lean as far back as I can. I semi-depress the shutter button at my full arm's reach, and I just try to make sure that it like goes green on my face. That I feel like is annoying.
What are your first thoughts on this camera? The S5.
There's a lot that feels similar, but it is much smaller than the S1H. If you take a look at that body, It's almost like half the size. I also love the little hot shoe adapter that comes in and I can plug XLR mics into.
Right, yeah.
I love being able to plug my XLR mics into all of these.
What made you go Panasonic?
Before this, I had the M50, and so I was just looking for an upgrade from that.
Oh, okay, wait, it's getting pretty dark, but this light.
I erased everything. Is that bright enough?
Oh yeah,
okay?
there you go.
Is that
Yeah,
good?
that's
Okay.
a light right
Okay,
there.
Cool.
Atmos Ninja also doubles as a little light.
I can turn on that too. There we go.
All right. Oh man, 2 lights.
2 lights.
Oh,
There we
look
go.
at that. If you hold it down low, you look like a monster.
Yeah,
you got to
okay.
bring
There
it
we
up
go.
like
There we
that.
go.
Yeah.
Like myself.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. All right. So why'd you go with the GH5?
The reason I went with the GH5S originally is because it produced a nice 4K image, which it definitely does. And when I was shopping around, I was watching a lot of Caleb Pike, DSLR video shooter, and Gerald Undone, and they were shooting on GH5, GH5Ss, and just overall the vibe around it felt really good to me. I put it to the Atomos as a monitor, and then also so that it goes straight into ProRes. I do have to carry it around with me everywhere, but I make it work. All they need to do with this is fix the autofocus and the IBIS, and this would have been like my perfect camera at least. Like the image. I love the image.
Okay, one of the things that blew me away with this S5 was the dynamic range test. So first of all, let's look at the shadows. And everything is underexposed with the lens. The ISO is locked in at 640, which is its native ISO for vlog. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take all these shots and try to correct them in post and see how recoverable these shadows are. At 3 stops underexposed, I'd say it's somewhat recoverable. You definitely see some grain, and at 5 stops underexposed, I mean, that's pretty extreme, not usable, but that's no surprise, right? This is pretty decent for shadows, but what blew my mind was how it handled the highlights. So same type of deal, same test, 5 stops overexposed on the right, and we correct everything, and oh my God, everything looks so clean. You almost can't even tell that the shot on the right was corrected. I mean, the dynamic range is that good in the highlights. I mean, there's a lot of professional cinema cameras that can't gather that much detail in the highlights. I also loved how streamlined it was working with the vlog on this camera. Just go to their website, download a batch of LUTs. They also give you a dozen different looks that you can go with. So by shooting vlog, they already supply you with a package of LUTs. I feel like every camera manufacturer should just do that. Looking at the ports up here, we have our headphone jack, our mic jack, and then down here we have our micro HDMI. Wish it was a larger HDMI, but hey, it's an HDMI port, it works. And there's a USB-C cable here, so you can actually charge the camera up while you're shooting. So that's definitely nice. You can keep this camera on for extended periods of time. And again, it takes a lot to overheat this camera, so yeah, it's an option. Now this is an L mount, and they have their alliance with Leica and Sigma. So it's not like they have as big of a selection of lenses as Sony or Canon would have, but with that alliance, it's cool that you can use different lenses from different brands and they work just as well as if they were native lenses. You can't really adapt this to other mirrorless lenses, but you can adapt it pretty easily to EF or PL. So that gives you a whole world of options out there. Also, anamorphic modes built into this camera. Now this doesn't really have some of the flashy, 240 frames per second options in here, but what it does have is the tools that cinematographers want. Not just zebras, but we actually have built-in waveform on this camera itself. There's this little spot meter that I can drag around the frame, and it tells me how many stops over or how many stops under I am on that part of the frame. That's pretty cool. When you're going manual focus, it has built-in peaking as well as magnification that pops up. So, if you're not too scared of manual focus, I mean, this camera kind of has it all. Like, I want to say if I was shooting a professional project or a short film or something like that, and my